Hi there and welcome to Fyendal's library. So today we're going to be looking at the Tall Dorinthia deck that is very popular in the Blitz meta. It's been winning skirmishes and it's a really good check to Ira. If you're playing Flesh and Blood and you're coming up against Ira all the time and you keep losing, this is a deck that you could consider picking up and try and get a few more wins back in your favor. It's a really strong deck in Blitz because it packs a lot of powerful cards, and it also packs a really strong package of equipment that you can use to block with. Equipment is quite strong in Blitz because it almost increases your health. You have very low health totals, just 20, so equipment can act as a way to block damage, but it's also very relevant because it allows you to keep cards in hand. So rather than using a card in your hand to block with, you can use your equipment, and then on the next turn when you're attacking, you have more cards available to do what you want with. That is very relevant for the Tall Dorinthia build because you really need a lot of resources to do what you want to do. Your cards cost quite a bit. There are some free ones that are very powerful, but you need to be able to have the resources to do the big tall turns that you want to do. I've played Dorinthia a couple of times. I've got to the top 4 of a couple of armory tournaments, but it's not my main deck, so I may say things that you may not agree with if you play the deck a lot, but I like to think I have a little bit of experience with the deck, and I've certainly played against it quite a few times. So let's start with the equipment. You've got the Arcanite Skullcap, which is a legendary card that can block for 2 or 3. It's a card that gains 1 block if you have less health. So if you use it for the first time and you've got less health, it will block 2, and then later it will block for 1. But if you use it for the first time when you've got more health, it would only block for 1, and then later, if you drop down, you can use it to block for 1 again, but a little bit less effective. But you're still getting a fair amount of block out of it. Courage of Bladehold is a very relevant card because it blocks for 2. If you use it to block twice, so the second time it would only block for 1, for 3 in total, it will get destroyed. However, instead of doing that, you can use its ability, which also destroys Courage of Bladehold before you block with it for a second time, but it makes your weapon attacks cost 1 less. And as we'll see, that can be very relevant and very useful for a resource heavy, for a deck that requires a lot of resources to make your weapon attacks cost 0. Braveforge Braces is another legendary card for Warrior. It allows you to, once per turn, you can give your second swing of your Dawnblade, well, your weapon, but in this case your Dawnblade, +1. You can only use it if the weapon hit the first time. That will almost certainly always happen if you're swinging for it twice in this deck. But do bear in mind if, for example, you decide to put in something like a Twinning Blade, that could be relevant. What's really interesting is it blocks for 2 and then blocks for 1 without completely destroying the card. You can still use the ability if you've used it to block twice, which is really, really nice. And it's always there if you've got a spare resource for your second hit. And of course, going from 3 to 4 is very impactful. Refraction Bolters is a very, very nice card for a common. If you hit with your Dawnblade, you can give it go again. And that is very, very useful because if you hit with your Dawnblade twice in a turn, you'll get a counter. And we'll talk about that later. It also blocks for 1, again without destroying the card, which is very nice. So Dawnblade, it's the signature weapon of Dorinthia, our hero, and it costs 1 resource to attack, and you'll be hitting for 3. If it's the second time you've hit with Dawnblade in a turn, you get a counter, and that means that Dawnblade will now be hitting for 4. Do bear in mind that the counter does happen before the end of the turn, so there are some bizarre situations where you can end up getting the counter on Dawnblade and then hitting for a 3rd time. I've only seen it happen once, but it was pretty hype. You'd need to be running Twinning Blade for that, which we do not do because it is a card I do not own. And then Dorinthia herself, her ability makes this all work because Dawnblade's attack is a once per turn action. So if you want to hit with it twice, you need that to be a twice per turn action, and that's what Dorinthia does. If you hit with Dawnblade, it allows you to attack with it for a second time. It allows you to, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you can do. You do need an extra action point to do that, and that is done by giving Dawnblade go again using one of the cards in the deck. Spoils of War, very useful. The unconditional go again is not so relevant in this deck as it is in Classic Constructed, where you run attack reactions after your first Dawnblade swing, but you can occasionally throw in an energy potion, which they might not be expecting. Warrior's Valor. You have to hit to get the go again, but you have to hit in this deck to swing with Dawnblade twice. So you're wanting that to happen most of the time. So the conditional unconditional is not as relevant as it is in Classic Constructed. Glint the Quicksilver is a very relevant card because it gives go again in the reaction phase. So you might just swing with a Dawnblade, or maybe swing, say, a Sharpened Steel Dawnblade for 6, and they might be like, well, I'm not going to block that because I don't want to turn on Reprise, and then you play a Glint to give it go again, and then they don't have a defense react to do anything about it. Glint also has the Reprise effect, which wouldn't trigger in that scenario if they didn't block from hand, but if they do, you get to draw a card. And that card could either be an attack reaction to get over a big block, or it could be just some resources that you can then spend on your second Dawnblade swing. Hit and Run, it's a bit of a pitch card, but it is relevant in the late game for giving your weapon go again, because that forces them to block it when they might not want to, and it puts them in a really tricky situation where they might overblock, where they really want to be putting on pressure, and it can change the dynamic a bit if you're saying, well, I'm going to swing in with my Dawnblade, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to overblock me and lose all the cards in your hand? And it can dent an opponent's momentum for a very cheap price. It's a 0-cost card, Dawnblade just costs 1, so it can be very useful. Then over here we've got Dauntless and Sharpened Steel. They're a bit of the outliers in this deck. They're really for pushing a really tall attack, and the Sharpened Steel can be really good in combination with some of your other cards to just push that damage a bit higher for free. Dauntless is a bit of a meta pick. It gives the weapon +3, just like Sharpened Steel does, but it costs 1. But what it does is make defense reactions, the first defense react your opponent play cost 1 more. That can really put a dampener on an Ira player's day if they have to play 1 for their Flick Flack, because now rather than, they might have to use 2 cards to do that if they don't have a counter on their Tunic to pay it. And, taking the counter off their Tunic isn't too bad either. But yes, a very good card to buff up your damage and really play on that tall part of Tall Dorinthia. Then we've got these 3 cards that I put to one side because they work really well in tandem with other cards. When I first started playing this deck, I found that I was almost being too aggressive and just playing the cards I had out in my hand as much as I could, putting as much damage in as possible. But some of these cards are actually better to save, maybe put in your arsenal, and try and get a combination of them to have a really strong turn. Steelblade Supremacy is a really nice card because it gives your weapon +2 attack for the whole turn. So if you're swinging with Dawnblade twice, you're getting that +2 for both swings. Also, if you hit, you draw a card, which is fantastic. Extra cards in your hands is either more damage through attack reactions or more resources to pay for what you want to do. Ironsong Determination is another fantastic card because it gives your weapon +1, which is very relevant, and Dominate. So that's now a Dawnblade swinging for 4 with Dominate. They can only block with 1 card from hand. Because cards mostly block for 3, that can be very tricky. When you start combining that with, say, a Spoils of War +2 and an Ironsong Determination +1, you're swinging for 6 with Dominate. It's really tricky for them to fully block that, and then you've got the go again in order to come in for more damage on the second swing, where it keeps the +1 and the Dominate, making getting a counter a lot easier. You can start to see where you combine things like Ironsong Determination, Steelblade Supremacy, and say a Spoils of War, you're starting to do huge amounts of damage, and you're drawing cards at the same time. It can be very, very strong, and a turn when you have those 3 cards might be a turn when you decide to pop Courage of Bladehold in order to pay for that turn. But because you're very likely to get a draw from Steelblade Supremacy, you could also use the draw from that to pay for some extra swings. Singing Steelblade is also very relevant. If you don't happen to have one of the Go Again cards, Singing Steelblade will allow you, with its Reprise effect, to fetch something like a Glint, or if you do have the Go Again and they still manage to get a really big block out, even with an Ironsong Determination, you can fetch an attack reaction to help you get over and then allow you to come in for a second swing. Just bear in mind, the Reprise effect requires them to block from a card in hand, so it can be a bit of an awkward card that sometimes you can't play if they don't block with a card in hand and they just get a defense reaction arsenal, or they use a defensive reaction arsenal and some equipment to block with. So just bear that in mind. It can be quite tricky, and you definitely don't really want to be playing it as a 1-cost increased damage, increased weapon swing by 1. Then we have the attack reactions. Let's go through them one at a time. So we have Ironsong Response, which is a 0-cost Reprise card. If they've defended with a card from hand, give your weapon +3. This can be a really nice card to combo with Singing Steelblade as well. because for Singing Steelblade's effect to trigger, they need to have used a card from hand to defend, so then you can go up by an extra +3, +4 in combination with Singing Steelblade for just 1 resource. It can be a card that can also help you get damage in with if it's just in your arsenal, because you don't need a resource to pay for it. So they might see 1 card in arsenal, no cards in hand, no resources, and think I'm fine, and then you come in with the Ironsong response and you get them. Stroke of Foresight, a very nice card, 1 cost +3, with a reprise that's not too relevant but can sometimes help you. If they use a card from hand to defend, you draw a card, but then you have to put a card at the bottom or top of your deck. So if you don't like it, you can put it at the bottom of the deck. If you do, you can put it on the top. And that can be either card that you have or any card that you have in your hand. It doesn't have to be the one you drew. So sometimes it can be quite useful to search for a card to do a bit more damage, or if you've got a lot of blues in hand, you can kind of fix your hand a bit mid-turn, but it often doesn't end up being as relevant, and it's just quite nice as a 1 cost deal 3 with a potential upside. Out for Blood, though, the reprise effect on this is a lot more relevant. Again, it's a 1 cost +3, but the reprise means that your second attack in the turn will get +1. So that can turn your second Dawnblade swing into a +4, which is really nice, because then they have to use more than just 1 card in hand to defend it. You can also combine that with an extra damage from Brave Forge Braces to go up to 5 if you've got the resources for that. So really nice for buffing up your second Dawnblade swing, which can sometimes be a bit lackluster if you had to use all of your resources to buff up the first one to get it over their block. You know, you use all of that resource to get over their first block, and then you just swing for 3, and then they shut it down with a card in hand. That can be a bit annoying. With the Out for Blood, it can go up to 4. They've only got 1 card in hand and no equipment. That can mean getting your counter. So really, really nice. Rout, a very good card for finishing games. The reprise effect sends a card they've defended with back to the hand. Can be really good in combination with Ironsong Determination, because they can only use 1 card in hand to defend, and the way it works is that they can't then play another card, even though now they've got no cards defending from hand on the field. So it's effectively a 2 cost +6 in that situation, so it can be really good for finishing out a game, for getting the win. Can be a little pricey though if you're not getting the reprise effect off. Overpower, another really nice card, though it is very expensive. With the reprise effect active, it's a 3 cost +6, so really good for getting over large blocks from your opponent, though very costly. You might need to have an energy potion out to pay for this, or have used your Courage of Bladehold to make your Dawnblade swings free, giving you more resources to play for something like an Overpower. And then we've got a Sigil of Solace. It's a really nice card, just in Blitz, for giving you more life, for helping you against Kodachi swings, and also helpful for Steelblade Shunt in the mirror, so we'll talk about that in a second though. We've got an energy potion here. We mentioned earlier that we can use spoils to give your weapon unconditional go again. Even if they completely block that down, you could then use the go again to play energy potion, but it's just a nice card to get out there to pay for a big attack later on, and it's also a pitch for 3, so it can pay for your turn. The rest are all just blue pitches. We've got a blue Warrior's Valor in there, a blue Ironsong Response. They're cards that you can use. You can play them if you need to, but really they're generally in the deck just to pitch with. Steelblade Shunt is another card you can pitch with, but it's also very relevant because if an opponent attacks with a weapon and you use Steelblade Shunt to defend in the reaction phase, you deal just 1 damage to them. And obviously if they're on 1 health, that means that they lose and you win. So the threat of the Steelblade Shunt is very strong against other Dorinthias, against Kasai, against Ira, even against things like Brute, who do use their claws or their club to hit you with. If you take them down to 1 health, they basically can't use those weapons anymore, or they're risking just losing the game there and then. And that's a really good situation for you to be in. And yes, that is the deck. Oh, and one last thing is the Heart of Fyendal. There was a quick cut earlier when my phone decided to update as I was recording this video, and it's ended up over here when it was over there a minute ago, so apologies for that. But the Heart of Fyendal, it's a bit of a swag card, but obviously it is actually quite good in this deck because it gives you, it allows you to heal for 1 when you pitch it and you have less health. That can be quite useful. It can build your life total up a little bit and as a free effect. You know, a lot of your blues you're just using as a pitch, so it does work quite nicely in this deck. But it's by no means an auto include, and don't go out buying a Heart of Fyendal just to put it in this deck. I was just very lucky to open it from a pack, so and if you were lucky enough to open one too, then you can consider putting it in. So that's the deck. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm not an expert Dorinthia player, but I really enjoyed playing the deck when I did play it. And I think if you're having trouble against Ira, it's something to pick up. The only thing I would say is it is a very expensive deck. You run 2 legendaries, a majestic equipment from Crucible of War, which is quite pricey to pick up, and 2 Spoils of War, which is a very pricey card. I think it's the most expensive non-cold foil majestic or non-foil majestic in Crucible of War, and it's just very hard to find. So it's a really difficult card to find and put in the deck. You can play a red Driving Blade, which is 2 cost, give your weapon +3 and go again, but it's not really as good. That extra cost is very, very prohibitive in a deck that's already struggling to pay for what it wants to do. So if you can afford it, or if you do have a lot of the cards already, consider picking it up. But even if you're just coming up against Dorinthia and you wanted an idea of how the deck plays and what kind of cards it uses, I hope this video was useful for you too. Playing as Ira a lot, it's always a tough matchup against Dorinthia because they can do so much in the reaction phase. They can go so tall and they can really blow you up with huge attacks. And if that's something that you like the sound of and you want to do that yourself when you're playing, maybe consider picking this deck up. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.